Joining me now from the US is Mark Watson, Inaugural Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Washington DC office. Mark Watson, thanks so much for your time. What do you make, first of all, of the Australian announcement today? We're providing weapons. The Prime Minister didn't mention the Americans or NATO or President Zelensky asking for them, but saying it was important to stand up for bullies and show that we're on the side of Ukraine here. What do you think?
Andrew, look, I don't think it's going to be strategically significant what we do, but in terms of the politics of the situation and ensuring that it's more than just NATO and the United States that are supporting Ukraine, I do think it sends a very significant signal, and it sends a very positive message. And right now, I think all of us are looking at the resistance that's going on in Ukraine, and I think there'd be a lot of popular support for doing what we could to assist with that.
And speaking of that resistance, is it a false dawn? Does it just add on a few extra days? Does that make a difference in terms of pressure on Vladimir Putin or not? Or is it anyone's guess, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two questions that are being asked increasingly here in Washington over the last few days. One is Vladimir Putin a rational actor at this point? Is what he is doing calculated rational moves, or is he, as some have suggested, looking a little unhinged in some of his statements and his speeches? And tied to that question is the second point, which is how far is he prepared to go to win this battle? We've seen him seemingly deploy cluster munitions against civilian populations. We've obviously seen the elevated status of Russian nuclear forces. And you put those two things together, a question of rationality and a question of how far he's prepared to go. And there's very real concern here. And you can only imagine the sort of discussions that are going on here in the National Security Council, the sort of plans that military planners may be drawing up, contingency plans in the Pentagon. It's a very challenging time in policy terms here in Washington.
Yeah, and when you talk about contingency plans, I guess I'll just come out and say it, you're talking about the possibility of nuclear war. You're talking about him firing a nuclear weapon and America having to respond quick before more damage is done. That's what they would have to look at, him having put the weapons on high alert. We all hope that rationally that would never occur, but that's the planning you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm certainly not suggesting that's what's going to happen, but what I am saying is that military planners will be looking at exactly what you've just described, Andrew. If there's even a possibility of the use of tactical nuclear weapons, and again, I'm not trying to suggest that that is what is going to happen, but if there's even a possibility that that could happen, prudence says that you then plan and you look at, well, what's our response going to be? How are we going to deal with that situation? So remember, this all stems from what President Putin himself has said and done. This is not something that's being generated here. It's a response to what's happening and what's been said by the Russian president.
And I guess the hope of the world here is, well, the hope of the world is that Russia would withdraw. But if they don't, that he would stop at the Ukraine-Poland border, that he wouldn't keep pressing, he wouldn't keep moving. Does the evidence suggest that is the case? He'd just be happy with a puppet government in Ukraine and that domestic victory, so-called victory for himself?
Well, it's difficult to, completely understand exactly what's going through his mind right now, but there's a very, very big difference between crossing a border into Ukraine and crossing a border into any NATO state. It's clear that Article 5 of NATO would require immediate response, and the US is already reinforcing, along with other NATO partners, NATO forces in the east of the NATO zone, butting up against the border with Ukraine. Again, you just have to think, surely not. I mean, it would be it's one of the reasons why the no-fly zone is not really, I don't think, being looked at seriously. The last three presidents here have all had the same policy of not wanting to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. And that includes Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden. Nothing's changed. Now, if you're going to enforce a no-fly zone, you have to countenance the possibility that you're going to shoot down a Russian aircraft. And if you do that, then you have really kicked things off in a way that nobody really wants. And there's certainly no appetite for that here, I don't think, either in government or amongst the American people.
Mark Watson, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.